Welcome to our program today. I am Béatrice Verger from NATIXIS Green and Sustainable Hub. Today is Monday, March 10, 2025, and we are exactly 4 years after the entry into force of the Level 1 of SFDR. The European Commission had just announced today it would make public its work for the Level 2. So we dedicate our program to this live today.
Hi, my name is Maya Godemer. I'm a senior policy analyst at Bloomberg NEF. And today we'll be joined by two experts, Lise Moret, who is head of sustainable finance and impact investing at Ottinger Banque Privée, and Olivier Paté, who is a product specialist in sustainability at BNP Asset Management. But before going to our panel and our reaction, I would want to talk to Lorraine Chevna, our EU correspondent who is live in Brussels, talking about the European Parliament with its ongoing discussion. Lorraine, can you hear us?
Yes, indeed. I'm in front of the European Parliament. The EU Commission released just today its draft proposal for the new SFDR regulation. And according to our information, the changes hinge around three main pillars. First, the disclosure regime. It's the core of the SFDR regulation and it will remain. However, with a lot of changes to expect, especially regarding the entity-level disclosure that should be simplified and made more useful for end investors. The principal adverse indicators are the ones that provide information on potential negative impacts of an investment. They should be also revamped quite a lot so as to provide more simple and more usable information. And it should be transferred at fund level in terms of disclosure, which is a big change. All funds should keep disclosing on the basis of the same requirements so as to create a level playing field, which is also a relief for some NGOs. The second big change is, of course, the much expected product classification. You might be aware that the regulation has created almost by accident a classification of products according to their level of sustainability ambition. Well, the Commission has decided to take on the creation of a more robust, assumed classification of funds. It will classify all products. They will have to classify themselves so as to provide better comparability. It will also be organized according to a hierarchy similar to some kind of Nutri-Score. So product A, for instance, will enable to provide investments for solutions providers in terms of sustainability. Product B will also design investments designed to support the transition or ESG improvement. Product C, it will be responsible investment, and so on and so forth. The third pillar of the changes concerns the definition of sustainable investment itself. The Commission has decided to maintain it at this stage, but to clarify the link with the famous EU taxonomy. So the big surprise is that apparently there will be no minimum thresholds in terms of taxonomy investment, but there will be an obligation to always use the taxonomy for eligible investments. So a lot of changes to be discussed by the European members of the Parliament in the coming months.
Thank you, Lorraine. Very interesting. So it seems that the first pillar of the revamp is sustainability disclosure and the disclosure regime. SFDR had the aim, at least the original version, to clarify and bring transparency to end investors on sustainability factors. Unfortunately, through the disclosure regime, it was actually quite hard to convey all of that to end investor, but it seems that this revamp really has the willingness to clarify disclosure. So my first question goes to you, Lise. How do you think the new SFDR could provide more simplicity in the disclosure regime without deterring the ambition of the rule?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So first of all, I think that when it comes to disclosure, and if we make the link with especially retail investors and their need, their preference for ESG and sustainability, definitely the aim, the initial aim of the regulator was to
well, to improve the level of information and the content, the ESG, the sustainability content of information provided to these retail investors that are less, let's say, mature in terms of understanding some complex dimension. And with regard to this disclosure issue, it makes me think of the MiFID II questionnaire, where this is the moment and financial advisor will have the occasion to discuss about ESG and ESG characteristics of investment with his or her client. And when thinking of PAI, that is adverse impact indicators, what is interesting to see is that currently it's something like 16 indicators that we will have to disclose at entity level and potentially at fund level, which is quite difficult for an individual investor to, let's say, to capture all the messages around all these indicators. So what we would expect if in case of a new decision around this disclosure regime is that at least we would have some more context and some orders of magnitude depending on the indicator. So let's think of, for instance, CO2 emissions, which is probably the most famous indicator we will have to disclose as a fund manager regarding this mandatory KPI. It's still not that easy to know what would be the best, or let's say the good level of carbon emission depending on the sector, depending on the asset class. So definitely there will be more work to do to tell a story to the investor. It can be a retail investor, it can be an institutional investor as well, I believe. So more context, more storytelling, orders of magnitude, and this is not only for climate, but I think that if we take a step backward, looking at the 14, 16 indicators, those that are mandatory, optional, etc. In fact, there are four families four categories of indicators and disclosure requirements. One is on climate change, and again, there is obviously a lot to say about climate change before providing many metrics. Then there are other environmental KPIs such as biodiversity, waste, pollution, etc. And again, this is not a topic when you think about ecosystem preservation, etc. This is not that easy to understand with only one KPI and one metric, and again, a story to tell around this. And then you have the social dimension, human capital, controversies. And here again, there will be something to say in a more general context.
I see. So yeah, and I think your angle is quite interesting because it's the retail investors, the one that have the need for more and more education. And I think when we refer to the MiFID II template, it's really questions that have to be asked around sustainability preferences and things like that when you're a fund provider. I want to turn to you, Olivier. When you hear Lise talking about these kind of indicators, the 4 pillars that she mentions, what kind of disclosure you reckon would enable end investor to make more informed opinions and choices that would effectively reach the goal of the Green Deal, which was at the back of SFDR, which is to reallocate funds towards the energy transition? What would concretely disclosure look like compared to where they are right now?
Thank you, Maya. So first, I want to say that I totally agree with Lise. We need a simplification because we need to strike basically a balance between detailed transparency on the one hand and the ability of any investors to process and digest the information that is provided to them.
Yeah.
And striking this balance means also making choices so as to what we decide to disclose and what we decide not to disclose, because there is a limited number of concepts that an end investor can and maybe want to digest during the discussion with the advisor. So basically, the central idea would be to refocus the disclosures on maybe fewer concepts, but maybe to dig a bit deeper on each of those concepts. So to try to do something that is maybe more synthetic than what we have today. And if we can do that on fewer concepts, fewer core concepts, including fewer quantitative disclosures, then we can, I think, extend the scope of the disclosure, which is what Lorraine mentioned, to more products, so kind of refocused quantitative disclosures on a broader scope of products. That's one thing. And then for products with a higher sustainability ambition, we will be able to provide more context. For example, when we speak about carbon emissions or carbon intensity, what is much, what is a lot, and what is not a lot?
Yeah.
And when you are just given a number expressed in a unit that is in itself very complex to understand, you need that kind of information to be able to assess what you are reading. And not only information about the process that led to the production of the quantitative indicator, like what is the methodology you used, what are the choices you made, what is your data provider, etc., but also information about, okay, how do I read the number that is given to me? How do I interpret this number? One very good principle that existed in the version of SFDR and that we should keep in principle is the proportionate disclosure to the ambition, the sustainability ambition of the product. Because indeed, we need to strike the balance for end investors to understand what they read, but also to strike the balance on not asking disproportionate disclosures on products for which sustainability is not necessarily part of the investment strategy. So still those products should disclose, but maybe not ask the same level of disclosures and adapt that to the sustainability ambition of the product. And so if we can do that on the one hand, and then think also about the big system, because there is a link between end client preferences, product disclosures, but also corporate reporting.
Yeah.
And we need to do the end-to-end link to make sure that the data, the coverage of the data increases, that the indicators become more accurate, more objective, if you like. Then I think once we have all of that, we can really leverage those disclosures in the discussion with the end client and leverage the disclosures to reallocate the capital towards what you are mentioning, the transition towards a more sustainable economy. So it's a system.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now if we discuss about the fund classification, as mentioned by our correspondent Lorraine, the new rule may introduce a new classification system, no more Article 6, 8, and 9. What will be, according to you, the ideal fund classification framework? Does it look like what Lorraine has just mentioning? And of course, always keeping in mind the objective to reallocate capital towards sustainable investment. Maybe, Olivier, do you have a view on that?
Yes, of course.
Of course, I'm sure.
Of course. So first, let's begin to say that indeed Article 6, 8, 9, there were tools to target the disclosure exercise towards funds that have the ambition to make sustainability a part of their commercial pitch, if you like. So that was the intent. And now we're really speaking about completely changing the perspective to have fund categories that inform on the level of sustainability ambition on the product based on criteria that are kind of in the intentionality of the product. So really switching from targeting the disclosure exercise to identifying the level of ambition of the product.
Yeah.
That would be, with the link with what we just said about the disclosure, that would be a huge clarification, because for end clients that would mean that they can, if they choose, look at all the disclosures and understand, but they can also just say, okay, this product is in this category, and that's enough for me. I understand that. I understand what is kind of the minimum standards that this product at least will integrate because it falls into this or that, that category. So that's great, but we need to think about the purposes of those categories if we want to design them right and avoid over-complexity, because it's always the risk when we are doing this kind of exercise. And so I think there are three purposes to product categories. The first one is that they need, of course, to be useful to clients, and that means that somehow there must be a link with the MiFID ESG questionnaire and the categories, one link. Then, second purpose, they must be also tools for transparency. So tools for transparency means that if a product adheres to one category, from the client perspective, you understand, this is what we were just saying, what is its level of sustainability ambition. And so that means that first, you have to define criteria that are calibrated to have this level of ambition. And of course, that you need to align the categories with the rules for the names of the funds. Otherwise, we are going to end up with a category that is sustainable and that will not be have the same funds are the funds that are named sustainable, and that would be hugely confusing. So we need to align all of that if we want the transparency objective to be reached. And last point about capital allocation, this is very important, and this is where the category, in the way they will be designed with the quantitative criteria, need to strike a balance between encompassing significant assets and their level of really ambition. Because if we are too ambitious, we are going to build niche categories that might be very useful for the transparency purpose, maybe very useful for the end client allocation purpose, but they will have so few assets that their impact in terms of capital allocation will be limited. So I think that those things are really dependent not much on the level 1, but more on the level 2 text, so on the technical screening criteria, the criteria that will make the categories, and in their calibration, it will be very important because it will really have an impact on the impact of the categories.
Okay, thank you, very clear. And you, Liz, from your really retail point of view, what would be this fund classification? Are you agree with what Olivia's just said? And especially, can we imagine that the fund must be a kind of hierarchy between the different product, depend of the level of sustainability, for example?
Yeah, I think that, again, I'll come back on the MiFID II questionnaire because, as Olivier was saying, in the end, I mean, all these directive and frameworks are combined through this MiFID II questionnaire. So do you know that I think that this is there has been a study, a survey on that telling that something like more than 50% of times the client, the retail client, the individual client was answering no to the
questionnaire.
To the first question, do you want to express your ESG preferences? I think that this is even worse than 50%. So, meaning that, I mean, this
and
is
if you say no, the questionnaire stop here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the reason why, I mean, the reason of this result is because most of time, this is the financial advisor himself or herself that is pushing or suggesting not to express any views with regard to ESG because it will potentially conflict with the asset allocation, risk reward preferences, etc., etc. So I think that this result, we need to consider this because obviously it was not the aim, the initial aim of the regulator to have such a, let's say, interpretation. Now, that being said, we must recognize that the current classification approach, 8689, is very broad, meaning that you don't have...
Article 8.
Especially. I mean, especially the 8, obviously, because meaning that the level of granularity in explaining the ESG, the impact, let's say the exposure to sustainability is not high enough, and is not high enough to incentivize investors to choose and to select sustainable investment. To do so, we need, probably we would need a bit of marketing here. That is, and this is why I like this idea of let's say, a rating system like the Nutri-Score,
Yes.
because it provides different level of ESG sustainability incorporation.
So a kind of hierarchy between the products.
Yeah, a kind of hierarchy, but we would probably need something else. And I know that there are some developments and innovation around this idea that aside let's say, the different level of sustainable investment and this hierarchy Nutri-Score approach, there could be some, let's say, a link, or let's say an effort to connect the dot between this and the sort of allocation characteristics the investment will have, depending of the, let's say, the level of ESG or sustainability incorporation the client, the investor will have chosen. Said differently, there is a difference between a pure solution approach, that is sustainable investment, current Article 9
Yes.
definition, and the best-in-class ESG fund that would target the full diversification in terms of sectors, even if these sort of funds will apply very specific rules with regard to sectors at stake, about transition and
Yes, Lorraine mentioned specifically potentially a new transition fund classification.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is it more clear for retail investors?
No, I think that transition must definitely be defined. Now, I also think that from a pure retail investment
Yes, of course.
viewpoint, yes, it's important to have more granular categories. But in fact, transition and, let's say, responsible investment, best-in-class, best corporate responsible practices, they can be the same, in fact. The question is about sectors at stake, because these are those sectors and those companies that will have efforts to make in terms of energy transition and the way they are tackling with climate change. So, in fact, there are different concepts we need to combine, probably, but in a simple manner. This is why I speak about marketing efforts. We all know that this is not the best quality of the current proposal we have. But yes, I believe that transition must definitely be defined, but this can be also incorporated with other characteristics. The point is that definitely we have this Article 9 impact, sustainable investment, pure approach, then the transition that can be combined with good ESG practices, and then we have, let's say, investment without any sustainability characteristics. But yeah, definitely, I think that a hierarchy would be needed to improve the transparency.
And maybe just last question on the fund classification. Do you both agree on the fact that all products have to choose a category as it is today on the level 1? We should keep this classification for all funds? Olivier, Lise, you can say just yes or no.
But, well, I think that this is already the case. That is, currently you have...
Yes, it's already the case.
This is already the case, and I think that it's a way to improve transparency, because once one funds provider we have communicated on one category, then it's also his responsibility to let's say, to implement and to provide the right level of disclosure. So yes, I think it's good.
And yes, on this topic, should it apply to all funds? Basically, I think that in the categories we are speaking about today, we must differentiate between the categories that are on the ambitious side of the scale, where, of course, it must remain voluntary to position a fund within this category because it's the intentionality of the fund manager at play here, and the categories on the more disclosure-only side of the scale, for which the disclosure exercise should remain really targeted, probably quantitative only, because otherwise you are going to build a monster. Okay. So that's why I will have a balanced answer on this, but indeed, definitely on the disclosure side, on a small common set of, for example, principal adverse impact indicators, it would have value to have a blanket disclosure across the board.
Okay, thank you.
Across all funds. And you would also see then an hierarchy between the different fund classification, like just like LEES, basically.
So you'd have a de facto hierarchy between the funds that do not have the intensity to promote ESG and the funds that do. But then on the question of the hierarchy within the categories on the ambitious side of the scale, there is a choice will have to be made between hierarchy or themes. So for example, if you have sustainable transition ESG, then you can have very ambitious approaches within ESG, and so the scale become maybe less clear. So it will it will really depend on the criteria, the technical criteria that are implemented, to see whether there is or there isn't a scale in the categories that are defined.
I see. We're going to move to our final topic, which is around sustainable investment. That was the third pillar of what Lorraine has said is being discussed currently in Brussels. And it's been one of the trickiest topics related to SFDR, defining what is sustainable investment, leaving it to asset managers effectively. It was highly controversial and difficult in the original text. There is a new definition that was proposed in the latest text, and I would want to understand if you agree with the definition, if you think it's going to be better, what should be the link with the EU taxonomy, for instance, with this new definition of sustainable investment. I'll go to you, Olivier, because, I want to have your view on that.
Okay, so let's start by saying that EU taxonomy is a very strong framework, and it has the advantage of providing objective data, which is the same for everyone in the market. So it's EU taxonomy, it's a kind of grammar of sustainability on the market, and that really adds values. Now, EU taxo is also still at the beginning, so that there is not that much data on the market, and so we can't build a diversified portfolio only using EU taxonomy as an input factor, because the investment universe is too small, very, very simply. So we do hope that this will change in the future, but still there will be in the future limitation to the EU taxonomy, like, for example, geography, because EU taxonomy is an EU regulation and we have global investment universes. So, of course, that limitation is kind of intrinsic to the EU taxonomy. And that's why the methodology of sustainable investment should be more seen as a kind of like credit rating, if you want. So it's the sustainable investments, it's how you analyze issuers, all of the issuers. The EU taxonomy is, of course, a very important input factor in your analysis of sustainable investments, but it's not the only one for all the reasons that we mentioned. And just like credit ratings, it's the job of the asset manager to have a sustainable investment methodology to screen the investments and decide whether or not they fit in the framework of a specific fund or not. So
you would keep a subjective approach that is particular to each asset manager on sustainable investment?
I would keep some kind of proprietary methodology there, because if you standardize everything, then you build something that already exists, and that is called the EU taxonomy. Yeah. So you need a complement to be able to go where the EU taxonomy does not go, especially in EU taxonomy. When you have a company reporting X% of alignment with the EU taxonomy, you know that the X% is very green, it passes all the criteria of the EU, but you have absolutely no view on the rest of the activities of the companies. Mm-hmm. And the job of the sustainable investment methodology, I think, if it's to be something different that adds its own value to the screening process, then it has to look also at this part of the company for which the EU taxonomy does not provide, by design, any information.
Mm-hmm. So you would keep sustainable investment as it is today?
we can reinforce the methodology, we can add the principles, we can add guidances,
Yeah.
we can add expectations, etc. But indeed, I think that if we build a kind of a lighter version of the EU taxonomy with sustainable investments, unless it is indeed reported by corporates, we'll always end up with the challenges we have in terms of comparability, and we will have a second EU taxonomy not as good as the first one, and that will not be more comparable than than what we have today. So we can improve what we have today, of course, but we should recognize the differences, the intrinsic differences in terms of purpose and functions between these two concepts.
I see. I think I want to turn to you, Lise, because you have a different view, obviously, like you talk more to retail investors, and I think sustainable investment can be also a very complex concept to explain, and also we've seen a big ESG backlash, so it could also be seen as, okay, I go to one asset manager, they sell me one vision of sustainable investment, I go to another one, they sell me another vision of sustainable investment, but both of them are supposed to be true. Would you agree, just like Olivier, that sustainable investment should remain quite subjective to allow asset managers to develop it the same way we see credit rating? Or do you think there should be more stricter definition of sustainable investment? And should that be linked to the EU taxonomy or not?
Well, in fact, so first of all, I think that the view of Olivier is, perfectly acceptable regarding the state of the art on taxonomy, the way companies are disclosing their capex, revenue, opex exposure to eligible activities. The point is that I prefer to project myself and the world in a few years when companies' disclosure on taxonomy, eligible activities, etc., will be not perfect, but better. And I think that the advantage with the taxonomy metric, KPI, whatever we call it, is that even if the framework is complex, and the technical criteria, etc., are not that easy to implement. And I think that for companies, it has been and it will be a nightmare to continue working on that. In the end, especially for, let's say, retail investors, less mature investors with regard to sustainability issues, it is simple. It is simple to say, okay, your portfolio is 20% taxo-compatible, taxo-eligible. It is easy to say your portfolio or this company has X%, Y% exposure of its R&D investment plan to eco-activities, etc., etc. And I think that, as I said, companies did already work very hard to compare and to align their level of reporting disclosure to this new framework. I believe that we should use it because it has a lot of value in the end. And actually, this is what we do. That is, we are trying more and more. And I've been personally very surprised to see our companies did work on that, did start to communicate that way. So yeah, let's imagine that in 5 years, I hope less, we will have a better disclosure and level of reporting with regard to taxonomy. I think that this is a good thing to try to standardize and to let's say, to tie sustainable investment definition to the taxonomy. Now, that being said, I have few comments on what has been announced by the European Commission. I think that, so first of all, and it goes with what you said, the DNSH principle, which is currently...
The do no significant harm.
Yeah, do not significantly harm principle currently used as part of the sustainable investment definition should remain, definitely, because it's not because you have activities, green activities, you are invested in a renewable, whatever, that you cannot have exposure to other activities that are harmful for the environment or whatever. So we still need to control for that. Now, with regard to the minimum level of taxonomy exposure, so I just want to recap to come back.
Yeah,
on
and we
one
have
thing.
to wrap up in less than a minute.
Currently, the market is less than 10% taxonomy taxonomy compatible. So at a minimum, we would require sustainable investment to be a bit more than what the market is doing. And finally, last but not least, I'm just thinking of the social taxonomy that has been, you know, let's say, put aside for the moment, and that should definitely be studied again to have this sort of decision and implementation.
Thank you so much, both of you. And it's funny because we end on a somewhat disagreement, which is kind of interesting and it's going to spur discussion. We want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.